We actually went live with two separate autonomous coding solutions. One was in radiology and one was in outpatient ambulatory clinic spaces. And so we intentionally started with a limited scope, moving a very small percentage. And so in radiology, we were deliberate about just turning on things like mammograms, screening mammograms, general regular x-rays, to test system, make sure we flushed out any issues or nuances with regards to going live. Right, we didn't approach this as a big bang. And then in the outpatient ambulatory clinic space, we chose 5 clinics that are pretty much just general medicine and or family practice. And that was intentional because that documentation is a little less complex, and we wanted to again flush out any nuances. So that is what we started with, and then as we start to expand, we are going to move to more complex modalities such as MRIs, CT scans, ultrasounds within radiology, and we'll do it in digestible bites so that it's things are fleshed out, and we don't flip a switch and all of a sudden now have a bunch of things not routing correctly and out of nowhere land, and some interface didn't work as intended. So there are always things that you have to consider when you're going live with any technology. And so that is my approach to doing this. I think we focused on low complexity, high confidence service lines. And that's kind of a strategy. First, to kind of manage risk and to validate performance. And then as we are more confident in the solutions and the workflows, we will continue to increase our percentage of volumes that we process autonomously. And that growth will kind of be driven on our AI performance and our governance around that, and what we're finding in terms of fleshing out things as we audit the AI. And then as we identify physician documentation opportunities. So that's kind of where we are today, is we're flushing those things out. We're identifying gaps with documentation. We're educating the providers. Hey, had you documented A, B, or C, this would have been coded a little differently, and this is what we're missing. And one of the things that we also noticed is the way that our physicians document certain things. And to give you an example, is you go to your doctor, you're being seen for something specific, like maybe you have an ear infection. That doctor says, hey, it's, we need to do an irrigation of that ear, and documents it in the same note as your clinic visit and your traditional E&M. Sometimes the AI is not able to discreetly differentiate between a procedure done at the bedside if there's not separate identifiable documentation. And we found that when providers are embedding that kind of in their exam, that the AI can't distinguish that. So that's one of the things we've been able to flesh out and go back to our providers and say, it would be very helpful if you wrote a separate discrete procedure note or bedside procedure note so that the AI can catch that. Because what happens is it ends up getting pushed to a coder to code. So the key lesson was that, we need to scale it and kind of depend less on the technology itself and more on building that audit and that governance, and making sure that we trust that workflow. And so my takeaway too also, I think, is for individuals to build out that audit and governance structure and make sure that you're auditing the AI, you're auditing the documentation, you're flushing out where you can go upstream and plug gaps and improve documentation so that things can seamlessly run through the AI engines. So our goal was not primarily workforce reduction, but workforce optimization. Since deployment, we have not at all released any staff. We have held some per diem positions. The biggest change was that coders are kind of shifting from that routine production work to more validation, auditing, and as a result, they're able to look at more complex cases, right? So some of that more what I call remedial, repetitious production, low complexity work is being able to come through the system without human intervention, and then we can upskill that staff to kind of audit behind AI, and also have the opportunity to learn new service lines, new specialties. So that's the approach there. But we have not seen a reduction in the labor force. We have intentionally used per diem labor in a capacity for things like we have PTO and vacations and FEMLAs and holiday and seasonal backlogs that we experience. And we usually have to fill what we called per diem positions, and those positions work a limited capacity of 16 hours a week. Those are positions that we've intentionally held to take a look at where the AI would demonstrate a return in terms of picking up maybe the slack of where a per diem coder may need to be leveraged. So obviously, we saw early on that governance was going to be essential to making our autonomous coding sustainable. Today, we spend approximately, I would say, between 2 to 2.5 hours on governance activities, and that actually is shared across like coding leadership, coding quality and audit teams, our revenue cycle leadership, maybe our IT and informatics teams, as well as our compliance and privacy team. So I would say each of those teams spending 2.5 hours, equates to probably close to an 8-hour day of governance shared between multiple people. Those activities kind of include things like performance monitoring, exception review, audit sampling, policy review and updates where we need it. Kind of vendor management fits in there a little bit. In our experience, governance requirements are, have kind of been stabilized after the initial implementation period. So I do expect that number to go down, but it will be ongoing. So we establish an accuracy threshold of 95% or greater, which is industry best practice. We don't expect perfection. We're willing to accept that 5% risk. Our goal was performance that was equal or better than our existing manual processes, right? While still maintaining compliance and integrity with revenue and all of those things. So if our performance falls below that threshold, and it's run through the engine, let's just say, and the engine is has an accuracy threshold of 80%, meaning they aren't 95% or greater in their confidence level that this is accurately coded by the AI engine, it will route for a coder review. So, and then we will conduct kind of a root cause around why it's not accurate. We may even identify a pattern and need to do an audit sampling. So those cases will be routed for human in a loop, and that's for all autonomous coding across the board. And then we're going to continue to retrain, can't say the word. Just kind of retrain the models and workflows as needed. So that is kind of our approach right now. Having that audit and root cause analysis will really help you drive and plug those gaps upstream. But in industry standard and best practice is 95% accuracy, and that's what we held our coders to before AI. So we're holding AI to the same. So I think I talked a little bit about it earlier on, where there's lots of examples, and it's not necessarily AI getting it wrong. And what I would like to emphasize is that AI code to its highest degree of specificity based on our documentation. So it may not be the AI that's getting it wrong. It could be that our documentation isn't digestible, or it could be that our physician failed to document laterality, and the AI can't code it to the highest degree of specificity without that specific documentation component. So thinking about things that are wrong, it's a combination of maybe the AI is not sophisticated enough, the documentation doesn't have enough content or specificity needed for the AI to actually autonomously code this, or potentially things that and the thing that I mentioned earlier was sometimes the AI needs a discrete data field in order to digest it and code it. And so that example where the physician decided to irrigate the ear at the bedside while also seeing the patient for an ear infection and embedded that bedside procedure into the exam documentation, the AI was not able to code it. And that was something we flushed out because it had no idea that it even occurred. And it wasn't until our audit found that type of thing that we discovered it. So it's things like that we're seeing at our organization. It's not necessarily that the AI got it wrong, but it is, right? So it's not accurate. So I want to emphasize that sometimes it has to do with the way your organization documents and the way that you the way that you flush that out is through education with provider documentation opportunities with, restructuring your bedside procedure notes. And then, I think the bigger thing is looking at your templates, right? Like, do you have specific templates that physicians are using? And when you kick off an AI procedure, you should look at those templates. You should work with your vendor to ask the vendor when you're document scoping, is the AI going to have trouble with our current, selection of templates being used in this area, whether it's radiology, whether it's outpatient ambulatory, whatever it is, you should really kind of scrutinize your documentation templates. And when you're doing document scoping in the very beginning of what you're going to feed the engine, test that out. Because you could flesh that out a lot earlier if you do. Yeah, I think we didn't see a lot of physician resistance. We have in the industry a national shortage of coders, and with that, staffing becomes challenging, especially with some of the more specialty areas where we don't find the expertise we need, and that can result in coding backlogs. That can result in physician charge lag, which then impacts their RVUs, right? So we didn't necessarily have resistance from physicians around the AI itself. Those concerns, were, is this going to improve the charge lag, right? Is this going to take the place of needing to hire coders? Our concerns were also around clinical accuracy. And is there going to be a potential impact on reimbursement, right? Is the AI going to miss something a human would find? So those were the concerns, and we have a pretty robust AI governance structure at our organization that looks at this engine, looks at the risk associated with adopting technology like this. But the way that we have solved their concerns or resistance is to say we will have 100% human in the loop on these until we get to a level of comfortability where we feel that the risk is low and that accuracy rates are high, and that we are monitoring very closely volumes, RVUs, E&M levels. If we see a shift down or up, we're monitoring all of that, and we will take a really close look at whether it's related to AI, whether it's related to physician documentation, whether it's related to an enhancement because we've educated providers or made a change. So those are the types of things that we were able to do to mitigate physician concerns or resistance. I think looking back, it's there's no regrets. I'll be honest with you. I think I would just be more selective about where automation is applied. I would continue to automate, and areas where it's repetitive work and low risk. But I would be very cautious about automating, and this is maybe forward thinking and how we're thinking now rather than kind of looking back. We're already being very cautious about how we will move forward in spaces where we have more complex coding schemas. Where we have a new clinical service line, we probably won't run them through AI until we get them established and we understand. And then I think also situations where there's frequently changing coding guidelines, right? Like things like telehealth. Those areas often require clinical judgment that remains better suited for a human. So the lesson is that the highest value comes from automating predictable work and low risk, where while concentrating on human expertise where it matters most. So I think that's kind of where my mind goes. That fully answered the question, but yeah. Yeah, I would not recommend implementing autonomous coding without a basic governance structure already in place, and then an audit to scale, right? Like audit. So I actually created a policy on AI auditing because we already audited all of our coders on an ongoing basis to ensure compliance and integrity and risk mitigation. And went to my audit manager and said, we need to create a policy on how we're going to audit AI the same way. This is coding, so there's no difference. And so that's part of that basic governance structure. So identifying kind of, at minimum, identifying like an accountable executive sponsor, including coding, quality, and audit, compliance oversight, operational reporting and monitoring, which I've alluded to a few times during this, is that data is going to help drive some of those decisions. And then identifying a process for handling expectations and escalations, right? Like if it's an IT issue, we've determined that the router or the interface is not functioning as intended. Make sure that you have an escalation pathway with your IT partners. This doesn't necessarily require a large team. It can, at a small hospital, it can often be 2-3 people, maybe even less. And then my advice would be to invest in governance first and automation second. So start with your governance before you implement AI. And then, I feel that many of my colleagues that I've talked to kind of underestimate oversight requirements and often struggle more with adoption and trust than with the technology itself. So like making sure you have the right people at the table and building out that governance. Yeah, I think, the biggest takeaway from our experience is that autonomous coding is not simply a technology implementation. It's an operating model change, and you have to have change management. You really have to work through that change management. I think the organizations that will succeed are the ones that pair strong automation capabilities with equally strong governance and have that quality oversight and also that clinical and clinician engagement. I also wanted to share, I know that's the end of that question, but it's kind of timely, this interview, because I'm getting ready to submit an abstract for a speaking engagement, and our title our title on that is How Autonomous Coding Transformed Our Approach to Provider Documentation and Education While Driving AI Governance and Audit at Scale. So it's kind of like very much around how, documentation improvement programs have historically struggled to create lasting change, because provider feedback is often broad and retrospective. So this gives us an opportunity to identify through AI governance where we have gaps in documentation. If an AI can't read it, right, and code it, then the same thing probably applies to a coder. And so we can use that data to drive improvement in documentation. And that's kind of the abstract that I'm going towards, how this will actually improve documentation integrity, which bleeds into the CDI profession as well.